Hello, and welcome to our New Year's edition of the Unspeakable Bits. I'm Travis Gleason, your host. We thank MS Ireland for their support and for giving us this platform to delve into the topics that were once and well, I suppose still are often considered taboo, but are real and they're important. And they're an important part of getting over and on and under and around and through all of the challenges that can be a part of living with multiple sclerosis. As I said, MS Ireland is providing us with this platform for the discussion, and we thank them for their technical help in making these important topics accessible to people around Ireland and, quite frankly, around the world, thanks to the internet, who are living with MS. It would be inappropriate for our guests tonight to answer specific medical questions, so we ask you not to pose anything specific. And none of the comments that are given tonight by our panel should be considered as direct medical advice. Always consult your physicians as for specific medical advice about your condition. Now, we will be respectful tonight, and we do not intend to offend any of our listeners. But that being said, by their very nature, these unspeakable bits can be uncomfortable to talk about, and they can be uncomfortable for some to hear. We'll be gentle, but we're going to be direct tonight. Now, earlier I'd mentioned the new year, and that's because January is a month of the resolutions, right? It's a month of hopes, often to do with eating and exercise, weight loss, more healthful habits in general. That's the case for the broader population as well as those living with those of us living with chronic illnesses like MS. However, living with MS can make some of those resolutions both more important and more difficult. So what better way to kick off the 2023 Unspeakable Bit series than to talk about food and exercise with their direct and theoretic and scientifically proven sometimes implications to our disease. Joining us for the program are an esteemed panel of international experts, and we are so very fortunate and so very thankful. Dee Laffin is what you might call a foodie's foodie. You may know her as editor-in-chief of Scoop magazine. She's a co-creator and co-host of the Spice Bag podcast here in Ireland. Well, again, I suppose internationally. She's a member of the Irish Food Writers Guild, and many of you mayn't know that she's also a person living with MS. Dee, you are very welcome to the Unspeakable Bits January.
Thanks so much for having me, Travis.
We're very excited. Dr. Jens Bansi, PhD, is a rehabilitation medicine specialist. He's both a clinician as well as a research at the Department of Physiotherapy at Klein. I'm going to ask you to pronounce that for me, Doctor, but it's Klein-in-Vallens, I believe, in Switzerland, and he's joining us from Switzerland. Many of you will remember Dr. Bansi from his presentation at the 2018 MS Ireland conference, which was live in Athlone, I believe, and then it was broadcast. Dr. Bansi, thank you again for being with MS Ireland.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And could you pronounce the name of the clinic there for us? Because I really botched that.
Kliniken. You just
Kliniken.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. And then Dr. Laura Piccio, MD, PhD, is a neurologist and a physician scientist. She sits on the faculty in the neurology department at Washington University in St. Louis, USA, America, as well as being an associate professor at the School of Medical Sciences and Medical Science Administration at the University of Sydney, when she joins us today. And I suppose we could ask you, Professor, what the future of MS looks like, because quite frankly, you're joining us from the future. It's tomorrow already there. It's 7 o'clock in the morning, I think, isn't it, Professor? You're very welcome.
Yes. Thank you for having me here.
No, we're very excited. And thank you for getting up early to do it. Dee, I'm going to start with you because, as I said, a lot of people will recognize you here in Ireland from your television work and all of that. How's your MS these days?
Well, again, thanks a million for asking me to do this. I'm delighted to talk about my MS with everybody. I've always been very open about it. And yeah, I'm actually really fortunate. My MS is good. It's how do you say, I suppose, under control. I've been an outpatient with St. Vincent's Hospital since my diagnosis, which was 11 years ago. When I was diagnosed, I had relapsed when I was 30, which was how I realized I had it. And that was with optic neuritis. So I was confirmed when I was 30, and I began treatment with St. Vincent's, at the MS clinic there as an outpatient. And I was very fortunate to get Professor Hutchinson was the head of the department at the time, and he's renowned as just such an excellent prof over neurology and chronic illnesses related to that. And basically, they were running a lot of clinical trials, and I was very fortunate to get onto a clinical trial from the get-go of my treatment, which I believe was really important for me in my care, because I was, with any clinical trial, I was going in and out of the hospital frequently to monitor, and if there was anything at all it suspected, whether I had a cold or anything, they needed to know about it. So I was monitored at a very specific level, and I think that was for years, and I think that really helped with my initial treatment with MS. And I suppose I've been, as I said, that was like I've been 11 years now, and I'm living symptom free, and my MRI scans are showing that I have 14 lesions in my brain, and they're showing that they're dormant and there's been no activity. So I'm very, very fortunate to say at this point in time that I'm living symptom free, and feel very fortunate for that. So,
and it's important what you were mentioning there, when people take into consideration the idea of whether or not they might want to join a clinical trial, and both of our professionals here run a lot of these clinical trials. It might sound a little scary sometimes, but as you were just saying, the level of health monitoring that happens, that takes place when you're on these trials, is really a benefit. And in fact, I know other people who have joined trials because maybe not in Ireland where the healthcare system is different, but in America, join trials just so that they could get an MRI that they mightn't be able to afford under their healthcare. I'm going to ask you one more question in reference to your MS. As a respected voice in the food scene here in Ireland, as well as somebody with MS, are you making now any changes to either your dietary, your food intake, or anything like that, and or exercise for your MS, I should say, specifically?
Yeah. So like everybody, I mean, who I think gets a diagnosis of anything really, trying to come to terms with that is also your own personal research into how to deal with it, how to come to terms with it. And I suppose I did a lot of research, being a journalist and journalistic background. I kind of delved deep and did a lot of research on, are there any kind of like that, any diets or anything, or dietary changes that I could make that might aid or help or whatever. I just looked it all up, and so I initially started a gluten-free diet, and I banned lots of things from my diet and restricted a lot of things. But I love my food, Travis. Like I really love my food, and I have built my career around food. So I didn't, I suppose, necessarily say in any research that I had found, because I didn't have any, my optic neuritis had cleared itself up, and I was in remission at the time. So it was hard to judge if it was helping or not, but I definitely felt, good, and I felt good about myself, and lost a bit of weight from coming off gluten products and things like that initially. But I kind of decided to just do that for myself a little bit, when I didn't stick to it as much as I had initially, I suppose, after the first year or so. And what I did start, though, from a physical perspective, was that I didn't really feel very fit at the time. I mean, I was only 30, but I just kind of felt, what, if MS is something that affects, my muscles, or I relapse physically, then I want my, like anything, like if you have a baby or anything for women, you want your body might bounce back a bit quicker. It might help in the kind of recovery period if I'm a little bit stronger in that respect. I felt like I just hadn't been to a gym in years and all that sort of stuff. So I actually found a trainer who deals with just coincidentally, the gym I had joined was a trainer who had worked with people with MS and also people who have other physical disabilities. And I started doing strength and conditioning, like interval training, HIIT training, I suppose, as well, but a lot of weights, a lot of weight and weightlifting and conditioning. And I've done that to this day, really on and off. And I found that massively beneficial, just physically, personally. And I don't know, I suppose like to this day, just feel that as I've been fortunate with my condition over the years, that I feel like having a good physical strength has really helped me maintain that, even from a mental health perspective. And having to deal with all the different things going in and out of hospital and stuff, being able to work out and keeping my body fit, I felt has really aided me in being in remission for longer periods. So that's something I did myself. I don't follow any diet in as such, dietary requirements or anything in relation to MS at the moment. So, but from the working out perspective, I really enjoyed it. And I've tried different things over the years, not just with the gluten-free. I did intermittent fasting, and I found that like really beneficial as well. And I suppose, people have different thoughts on that, but I really find that it works for me. And again, especially with things like tiredness and productivity, levels and energy levels, I really find that intermittent fasting really aids my productivity and my energy levels.
Yeah, certainly, and the professor will speak directly to that in a bit, and I thank you for that. I approach a lot of the same things the same way, and it is important that we remember that a healthy body is going to recover from anything better, and that's always a great place to start. There is an important study out as well, and while it's not specifically about, say, food and MS or exercise and MS, it's about obesity and the how it correlates to a quicker progression to a moderate level of disability with the disease. For a long time, researchers have known about a high body mass index or obesity in children being a risk factor for MS, but by the time you're diagnosed, you got the disease, so that risk factor sort of doesn't matter. It's kind of moot. But this research perhaps gives us another reason to think about reducing the waistline when it comes to progressing our disability from MS. I'm going to ask our producer Aoife if she'll put up a link to that study in the comment section for everyone to see it. And then for those of you who are watching back on this later, not live, it'll be in the description section when it's up and running. It's an important study that it shows how it fits the whole diet and exercise theme of this program together. And so I'd like to get specifically to some of those dietary interventions in a moment, but I'm going to turn to you, Doctor, in reference to exercise. And I remember your presentation in Athlone. Your research shows a direct correlation. I'm not talking airy-fairy stuff. I mean, this is like measurable, direct evidence that a specific style of exercise, and I'll let you describe that, can help neurological health. So can you give us a quick synopsis of that research and that type of exercise that shows benefit?
Yeah, sure. So what we've been looking at now since 5 years are higher exercise bouts. Like Ms. Laffin already mentioned the interval, the high intensity interval, where you, with acute exercise bouts, go to kind of a limit, a really subjective felt limit. So I'm really talking about 95 to 100% what is possible. And that's kind of a paradigm change, because when I was in university, there was the consensus that you had to really slow it down, and because of the UTOF phenomenon, that the moment you start being active, the body temperature, the core body temperature goes up, and then because of this upgoing, you get a kind of exacerbations of the symptoms, worsening of the symptoms. And at that time, it was even thought that it was kind of on the nerval point of view, that you even get an interruption of the nerval activity, and that symptoms really badly worsen. But there's now been a change, and since 5 years, it's even like the moment you go into exercise, you go into structured professional exercise, you always quite rapidly come down to this interval method. So 5 intervals, 1 minute, so really short, really acute, on and off. And so if you compare it with the standard care, that tells you that you exercise regularly, continuously with 30 minutes, you have kind of less, 50% only of the training time compared to the standard care. But then our research showed that you get almost 30% more effects with this less training time. So it really depends on what you do and how you do it. On the other side, I mean, you really have to structure it. So maybe not kind of the way you hear about it, you read about it, and then you do it at home. So I always prefer to recommend being more pragmatic. So I think the evidence is really clear that the moment you start being actively and you kind of more structure your daily week in being active, then you really, you're there, and it's not going down to kind of structuring and getting the method right. So it has to fit in the daily routine. And the moment you start being regularly active, I think that's the main key and the game changer in this part of exercising and MS.
Yeah, when you're talking about these very intensive, high intensity intervals of a minute, I mean, that's very short, but pushing ourselves to 95 or 100% of what we can do for that 1 minute. I suppose we really find out what we can or can't do. That really is a relative figure. As you said, it's very subjective. So and many of us with MS, we relate what we can do to what we used to be able to do. And so, you know, when we think 100% for 1 minute at a time, we automatically go to a place of, well, I can't do that anymore. But we can, because it's 100% of what we can do. Is that correct?
Correct. So it's kind of this subjective felt maximum of what you can do. At the beginning, when you come to the clinic, of course, what you can do is compared to when you leave the clinic, of course, less, or at the end, it's higher. So this subjective felt maximum, of course, changes, and it changes very quickly. And it's normal. I mean, that's science, the dose-response relationship. So the moment you're less active, you have kind of less capacity, which is on one side, of course, bad news, but on the dose relationship part of view, it's good news, because the moment you start exercising, the effects, they come really quickly. And the more fitter you get, the more structured, the more harder work, the longer it takes that you really feel that you really change something. So in the first weeks, you you change 200, 300%, whereas an expert, you say that can't be. But yes, it can be, because you're so far away from the reference value, meaning that you compare your values with the healthy female or male in your age, and you're so far away that the moment you start regularly doing something, you quickly progress.
Right, and we'll talk some of those specific exercises, because I know that many of our listeners and our viewers have sent in questions relative to what exercise can I do, you know, if my legs aren't strong or my arms aren't strong or whatever. So we'll get specifically about that. I've got in front of me the winter edition of Momentum magazine, which is from the National MS Society in the United States. And it's kind of ironic that we had planned this. I suppose we're not the only ones that came up with the idea to talk about diet and exercise in the new year, but theirs is all about diet and exercise. I'm going to again ask that a link be put up to that so that you can read that online. It's online as well. And inside there are a number of diets that are specifically mentioned. So that's going up in the chat. There's a direct impact on intermittent fasting and calorie restriction, and how that can deal with MS, the disease itself. And I will, I suppose, disclose now, I use the kind of that restricted intermittent fasting or calorie restriction diet plan. And I started that just to lose some weight before I had understood the implications of MS, and I've had my ups and downs with weight over a good portion of my life, and my MS has reduced my mobility, and those struggles became all-out battles. So when I began using the intermittent fasting for weight loss and control a number of years ago, that combined with a regular exercise pattern, I found that I was able to stick to that, and the intermittent fasting was I guess it was flexible. I could move the days around, etc. So what I'm going to do now is we go over to the professor to talk about some of this stuff. I'm going to ask that anyone who's watching live that would like to submit a question to us, if you would put that not in the comment section, but in the Q&A section there, and Aoife will be able to go through those, and she'll send those on to me to ask to our panels. So before I do that, I'd like, Professor, if you could sort of give us a basis of your research having to do with calorie restriction, and again, not just some of the conceptual benefits, but neuroregeneration and how what we eat and gut health, etc., directly affects the structure of our brain, and thus how our MS seems to be working or not.
Yes, of course. So, so basically, I've been working in this area of research for a while now. My main work has been done on specifically the potential role of calorie restriction in multiple sclerosis. We have started our work by using what are called the preclinical models of this disease. So basically, we have used animal models to test the effect of specifically calorie restriction. And then we moved into intermittent fasting. And more recently, we have also, since, you know, we provided a pretty strong, I mean, our work and also the work from other groups provided pretty strong evidence of the potential benefits of this type of diet in preclinical models. We have then moved into performing clinical trials. The work, you know, on calorie restriction, specifically intermittent fasting in patients with MS, is just, you know, a part of the research in this field, which is, you know, kind of potentially affecting many other diseases. So the benefit of this type of diet have been proven, of course, in ameliorating, in general, in the health promoting effect of these approaches, as well as in the potential anti-inflammatory and, as you said, protection against neurodegeneration associated with calorie restriction. When you do calorie restriction or intermittent fasting, which actually those are terms that are encompassing potentially very different approaches. So with calorie restriction, it can be daily calorie restriction. So basically every day you sort of restrict the calories that you're eating, versus intermittent fasting can, you know, be done in many different ways. But as Travis, you were saying, it's just potentially a way to control your body weight to establish a good body weight and then maintaining over time. So there are strong evidence of being able to activate a certain adaptation in your physiological adaptation, metabolic, endocrine, immunologic adaptation in your body that will fight against inflammation. And this can happen at different levels. Modulation of a certain immune pathway that are supposed to be relevant in the pathogenesis of the disease, as well as potentially, as you were mentioning, also the interference with, or changing the characteristic of what's now called as the gut microbiome, the entire all the microorganisms, the bacteria that we host in our gut, and we know are really important also to modulate many different aspects of our physiology. So we have been able, you know, what's the in this particular for this particular topic, diet and multiple sclerosis, I think we have to separate what are the individual stories of people that have done a diet and that they've had benefit from the diet, and then they sort of advocate that as a sort of, you know, way to deal with the disease, which, you know, you will hear all the time, especially, you know, they are with the fact that people can access internet, and so you will hear lots of these stories. So this is one way, but it's not the way, you know, a scientist like me will look at the problem. So once we have, you know, this type of claim, we need to provide scientific evidence that it's true or not. So that's why we do studies first in animal models, and then we move into patient, and even studies in patients can be very different. So there are studies that are less controlled and less rigorous compared to others. So the studies that are the gold standard to demonstrate the potential, you know, beneficial role of any intervention are those that are called randomized controlled clinical trial. And we have to say that, you know, in this specific topic of diet and multiple sclerosis, there is still a limited amount of these type of trials that we can refer to in order to provide a clear scientific evidence that one diet is, you know, definitely good, the good diet for multiple sclerosis. But I also have to say that we are starting to see this type of studies, especially in the context of, you know, calorie restriction and intermittent fasting. So we have had in the last few years several studies, you know, good quality with vigorous criteria that have been done, and that have demonstrated the beneficial effect of this type of intervention. For now, in terms of measure of, I mean, most of them were measure of fatigue, amelioration of measure of fatigue, and other quality of life measure. But we are also providing, especially in my research, the effects of this specific diet on more basic pathogenic mechanism of the disease. So we have looked at the effect of the diet, more the anti-inflammatory effect of the diet by changing, you know, reducing the adiposity, so changing all the product, because the adipose tissue, we know it's not just an inert organ that stays there, but it's affects storage. It's not only that, it's a potential endocrine organ that is secreting potentially pro-inflammatory factors. So this type of intervention is capable of modulating the production by the adipose tissue of these pro-inflammatory factors. So in that sense, could have a beneficial role in multiple sclerosis as well as in other conditions. Similarly, we have shown that calorie restriction or intermittent fasting can also modulate the gut microbiome, and so also modulate inflammation in that regard. Actually, we have been able to show, for instance, that the gut, this will be we have done it in the animal model, the gut microbiome was also able to transfer the protection. So if you subject mice on calorie restriction, they will on intermittent fasting, they are protected, or they develop a less severe disease. What we have shown that this protection was transferred by the gut microbiome, showing that the gut bacteria could potentially mediate some of the protection by the intermittent fasting. So, and the message that I want to just give, it's mainly that, you know, it's not only one factor, it's a very complex, you know, the diet, calorie restriction, intermittent fasting, as well as all the other diet, they're not just working on one single factor. It's a very complex set of changes that are happening in your body that will, you know, work together for the outcome.
Now, you had said that there's some specifics and differences and similarities, etc. My understanding of intermittent fasting isn't necessarily not eating on those, you know, 2 days a week or etc. But it's a combination. It's restricting calories. So I suppose when I began this whole process, and perhaps you as well, Dee, it was 2 days a week of eating less than 500 calories in those days. Would that be considered intermittent fasting still, even though you're not completely fasting?
Yes, you're right.
And
so that's what I was saying, that there are many different protocols. Those are terms that are used, are very general terms.
Yeah.
Then practically they are, especially in patients, they can be implemented in many different ways. And the type of intermittent fasting that we kind of call intermittent fasting that we tested clinically in randomized clinical trial, what I told you, the high quality studies, it's actually what you were saying, not intermittent fasting, but more properly defined intermittent calorie restriction. So every 2 days per week, the participants in our study, they were restricting the number of calories to less than 500 calories per week.
And I'm going to go to you, the foodie there, Dee. A lot of people might wonder how could someone really get away with eating 500 calories in a day and not feel like they were withering away and suffering headaches and all that. And perhaps I game the system a little bit, because I find that if I make a broth-based soup with chunks of vegetables, and I can almost eat as much of that as I want, and I'm not getting that calorie, but I don't know that I'm giving my gut the rest that we're intending on intermittent fasting. But could you give an example of what can someone eat in 500 calories and still feel a bit satisfied? I mean, I don't mind feeling like a little hungry, because we all like to suffer a little bit. But what might be some of your suggestions for a high impact, but low calorie meal or a day?
Sure. Well, first of all, just to say, I actually never really did the 5-2. I did on a daily basis, did like kind of 16-8, where I ate all my food within kind of 8 hours and then fasted for 16. So it was a different kind of thing. And I used, when I first started doing intermittent fasting, I think I used an app, and it would give you like one day that was slightly different, but it would kind of move it around to kind of keep your fasting and keep your body, and your body wouldn't get used to the fasting. It would change it up a bit. But I found that really good, because I would just basically, whatever hours for me, when I was working, as you said, I enjoy my food. It's hard to work around that. So I would sometimes eat my breakfast later. So I would do maybe 12 to 8 in the evening. And then I found I didn't get hungry until later in the morning. So it was easier for me, rather than like a 9 to 6 or something, because I was always hungry in the evenings. And if I wanted to go out for dinner or something, it was better to do it that way. And then my fasting would be through the night. So I found that really easy. So I think when you're doing intermittent fasting, it is good to look at your schedule and look at how you eat, or when you find yourself most hungry. First of all, to work out your meal times. I think that's really helpful. Do you want to get your calories? But look, 500 calories, it's funny when you start, when you have to do that you find that it's not a lot of calories. And then obviously most of us would have, something like maybe 2,000 calories a day, or 1,500 if you're limiting and things like that. So 500, I find, for me, is looking at the kind of your fats and your, looking at your diet and looking where you're spending most of your calories. I think, first of all, sometimes a lot of people need to do a bit of exploring initially before you even start into restricting it, and looking at where you're spending those calories, because it's amazing sometimes where you don't think there are calories, and there are a lot of calories. Like, some people think that they're eating really healthily, or not so calorie dense, but they are. So what I would say is, I find with our meats and our fats, is to look at proteins and fats, because sometimes we're using too much oil or butters or things to cook with, and I think that's a good way to kind of limit your calories. And then also looking at our meat consumption, in terms of, obviously, if you're using chickens, turkeys, porks, they're better than beef or lamb in terms of calorie intake. Pulses are also really good, like lentils, things like that, in terms of getting really nutritionally dense meal, and having a lot more in your bowl or on your plate than you would think. You can eat a lot more. So like you were saying, you made a broth, a kind of that sort of thing, but you can make kind of cassoules or, those kind of like soups with barleys and with kind of lentils in them. And I think you kind of pack a lot of protein and a lot of calories in there as well. I definitely think it's worth also looking at. I'm a big believer, I suppose, in nutritionally dense food as well, in terms of, trying to eat seasonally and trying to make sure that, obviously, if you're buying vegetables and fish and everything locally and in season, then you're going to get most out of your nutritionally dense, you're going to get most out of your food. So to look at that as well, when you're looking at where to take your calories from. Fish is obviously a great thing for us to consume if people like fish and can have it in their diet. It's another great way to have a lighter meal in terms of like you get, like, it's not as high in calories as like our beefs and lambs. But I found, for me, definitely it's packing it with vegetables, looking at your lighter meats, and things like pulses and lentils, as I was saying as well. Just I love having those, and I think they add a lot of weight to the food without adding a lot of calories. So you can get that in 500 as well. Yeah.
Good stuff. I mean, and you're hearing from two foodies here who do indeed love their food. Doctor, we've got a couple of questions that have come in reference to what you were talking there with Uthoff's sign. And for those who don't know, obviously, about that specifically, that's when the core body temperature goes up and we feel our old symptoms get worse again, et cetera. But we're not doing damage. There's a question in reference to how do you recover from that high intensity? But then also, is there anything that we can do to prepare for the onset of that in the concept, pre-cooling or anything along that line?
Well, there will be a symptom worsening. So the moment you go into the exercise, you go into the higher intensity, of course, you kind of shift boundaries, you go to a limit, and then of course it's clear that the body will react, and it's completely normal that you will have a reaction and you will feel this reaction as a worsening. But these worsenings are always transient, and they will always kind of dry out, and after 15 to 20 minutes, normally the body is then back kind of in a balance, in a homeostasis. The longest what I've seen was 1.5 hours of worsening of symptoms. And then of course, like you say, the moment you start cooling, you cool the body down, or maybe before, during, or after the session, you can counteract against the worsening. But I think if you really do the intervals, if you follow the protocol during our studies, then I think it'll always be a worsening of symptoms, and you can cool as much as you like. You will always have a phase of 15 minutes afterwards where you really feel slushed. And then we even keep a bed next to the cycle, and then the participants, they get off and they kind of crash onto the bed, and then after 10 minutes they recover, they're back again. And then maybe in the first 15 minutes, they subjectively say it's a worsening, but then they get this window, maybe 1 hour to 1.5 hours after the session, where they actually subjectively say that they feel better, that they can walk better, that they can walk faster, that the capacity of tolerating exercise is better, that brain fog is better, and they kind of feel a positive reaction.
So this really comes to the point when you were talking about planning. This has to be something then to planning,
and then of course it's clear you plan an exercise session. You want to be very effective, so you're in town, you're working, you do the grocery shopping, and then coincidentally the training center, my PT, is just next to the grocery store, and I pop and stuff in everything into the same day. And I kind of miss that 2 days later, I have a full day off where I kind of have nothing to do. And it would be more effective to kind of shift the session into this day off. and not do everything at a time.
Understood. Professor, we've got some questions in reference to inflammation, gut inflammation, inflammatory foods. When it comes to gut health in general, are there, I told everyone not to ask specific questions about specific issues, but are there specific foods that appear to be unhealthy for gut health, and are those foods inflammatory foods, and what should we maybe avoid?
So I think we go back to, you know, what's scientifically proven and what's not. So when you talk about inflammatory foods, it's a term that it's more for, I guess, the general population than for someone that is doing, you know, like looking, you know, doing some scientific research. So definitely, I think, you know, just to echo what Dr. Leffen was saying, you know, I've been, you know, the high quality diet will just be good also for the gut microbiome. So eating what's generally considered and recommended and healthy quality diet would definitely, you know, be beneficial for the gut microbiome, as well as, you know, all the potential mechanisms that they can influence in our body. So what I'm saying is just a diet which is rich in fruit and vegetables. Avoid as much as possible all highly processed food, which are empty of calories and, you know, with high sugar, very moderation, or use in moderation salt. Meat products are not, they don't necessarily have to be meat, and meat products that don't have to be just banned, but they can be used again in moderation. Encourage the use of, you know, the fish maybe in the diet, which has probably some benefits, legumes as a source of protein. So these are general recommendations for an healthy diet. So in this sense, you know, so this is what I'm saying, that, you know, it's when you hear about inflammatory food or inflammatory diet, it's a kind of a term from the general population, but it's not like a very scientifically, doesn't have a real meaning from it. And there are no really clear evidence of what we are talking in this sense, scientific evidence.
I hear the term nutritionalism when you hear words like that. So it's a sort of almost a pseudoscience, I think. Now,
I mean, I understand the concept of leaky gut, you know, inflammation. That also a part of what you probably were saying, which can so like the fact that there could be some inflammation at the intestinal barrier, which is related also to the gut microbes that you are hosting. So that's something that we are studying. So it's a major area, but it's still in the beginning of investigation. So there are some evidence that there are changes in gut permeability in patients with MS, and that this could potentially, you know, higher permeability could lead to the absorption of factors from the bacteria that could potentially modulate your immune system. So that's also something that, but it's still in the, you know, sort of at the beginning of what we are to understand.
Many people might not know this about you, but you, as part of a fundraiser for MS Ireland, you trekked up to base camp for Everest. And we were talking here, what was this, like 5,300 meters for elevation up there. And though it might be cold, did you experience anything like the overheating Uthoff syndrome, or because I'm sure you're layered and all that, maybe the time of year, but did you experience anything up there? I suppose altitude sickness might have been something more important to think about than Uthoff sign, but did you experience anything along that line?
So yeah, actually the time of year I went was September, and it was more the off-peak season for there, and good old climate change was kind of rearing its head. So we had unusually higher temperatures when we were kind of up towards base camp. So it never got really cold for us. But the temperature did fluctuate from day to night, and I think you know, it would be cold, but I didn't notice so much as the overheating, but definitely things. I also had to bring medicine with me, which was because I was injecting frequently. And so the whole rigmarole of getting that through the airport and all that sort of stuff was lots of fun, and trying to put it into backpacks which were being carried on yaks up a mountain beside us was quite you know, finding a spot to do it, and all that sort of stuff. So look, there was all that kind of things I had to deal with physically, but I didn't find it to any of my symptoms so much, and it was a very tiring experience. And I think that had to do more with the lack of oxygen and altitude more than me physically. Like I think I was very proud of how well I did with it. I did do an awful lot of training beforehand for like a year beforehand, and that's just, I went out hiking loads. Like in Ireland, I just, you know, every weekend I took myself off and went up one of our beautiful hills, because I was just told the more you just got your body used to moving in that kind of a way and on that kind of terrain, the better it would be. I also worked with a personal trainer at the time who was specifically training me for altitude and for the recovery of that. So how to, like, when you're really, really tired and, you know, like that, you've maybe pushed your 100% in that day, and you're burning something like, I think it's like 5,000 calories a day or something ridiculous that you have to eat to try, because you burn way more at altitude. So you're eating all the time. You're, you know, feeling tired, you're working all the time. And then when you crash at nighttime, I think it was the kind of, but having to get up very early, it was that kind of quick recovery of, which I definitely found that quite difficult, of, you know, being woken up at 4 or 5 in the morning after having such a long day the day before, and then having my body to kind of recover from that. So maybe that was kind of more the fatigue and the kind of just physical endurance, maybe, rather than I didn't have any overheating. And obviously on the way back down, I got altitude sickness, not on the way up. After we did base camp and I went up after base camp, we had an opportunity to go up higher than that, because on a peak that was near Everest, and it's basically the best view of Everest you can get, because when you're at base camp, you're in a, like, what looks like a quarry, like you know, you're on a glacier, like you can't actually see Everest from where you are, really, because it's kind of behind, because it's just so big, it's behind the ridge. So we had the opportunity to go up on this other mountain nearby and look at directly across at Everest, and it was as close as we could get. And that was after doing a 14-hour hike that day, then going to bed at 5,300 and whatever, as you said, meters, and getting a kind of a sleep apnea, because you just can't breathe. I couldn't breathe very well up at that kind of height, so I didn't sleep well. I kept, like, because when you fall asleep, your heart rate slows down, and then you're not getting enough oxygen, so you kind of wake yourself up in this kind of sleep apnea. So didn't really sleep, and then got up at 3 in the morning to go up this mountain. But oh boy, was the view worth it when I got up there. But when I was coming back down, so we got back down, and then we were like straight into that day's hike, which was another 14 hours. So the endurance and the tiredness was just excessive. And that's when I got sick. That's when I got.
Yeah. I think a person without MS would be struggling.
Yeah,
there.
well, this is it. Yeah, you know. So
yeah, speaking of, sorry to cut across you there, Dee. I want to get a couple of questions in. Speaking of recovery, Doctor, some people want to circle back around here, and when you're talking about the breaks in between this interval training, how long is a break? If we could do 1 minute of this, you know, all out hell for leather, how long is the break then between the next one?
Yeah. So the session itself, it's kind of structured around the peak heart rate that you gain in a cardiopulmonary exercise test. So I think that's really really relevant to mention that you need the baseline value, that you know what your body is able to cope. And so the 100% is defined of this peak heart rate in the test. And then the break means that you don't do a break in form of nothing, but you do regenerative cycling. So you go down with the intensity to 50 to 60%, and you wait till your heart rate goes down. That depends then on the daily form that you have, and you can really see differences. So on some days it'll really go down quickly, and then on other days it takes 5-6 minutes till the heart rate goes down. And that correlates really well with the subjective feeling of, oh, I'm not feeling so well, I'm completely foggy today, I'm completely fatigued, I don't feel well. And then you can see on these days that it really takes longer. And that's really relevant and important to wait till your heart rate really goes down. And then if you see that it's kind of impossible that the heart rate goes down to 60%, then I would also leave out the 4th or the 5th session even. And normally the participants, everyone manages 3 and ideally 5. So minimum 3, and then depending on your daily form, it's either 4 or 5.
And you mentioned a bicycle, but I suppose then for people who are their legs aren't strong enough to get their heart rate up like that way, there's the hand cycle that can do sort of the same thing.
You have a rowing machine. I mean,
there are a lot of ways to do it.
That's the protocol in the randomized controlled trials. So that's the study intervention in a really controlled setting. But then again, like I said in the beginning, I mean, you keep it pragmatic at home. I mean, it's so relevant that you guys are active and you don't have to structure the exercise session. I mean, if you manage to go out and what you do is it's relevant that you're motivated in doing that. So if you don't want to run, you don't run. If you don't want to cycle, you don't cycle. If you want to swim, then please go swim. If you want to dance, you dance. So it depends on where your motivations are. And it really depends on the regularity that you really do it regularly. And then if you dance, you just pop in 5 sessions in the dance where you do it a bit faster, where you just go out of your box. And if you've done it always the same time, latest, now it's the time to change it, you know? So you do it quicker, you do it longer, whatever you do. If you do a walk with the dog, then take another route, take it longer, or take a hill. Kind of like you scan the scenery, and then you focus a tree, and the tree is like 100 meters away, and then you just try to go faster with the dog. Of course, it depends then that it has to be secure, and it depends on the age of the dog. So if your dog is like 12 years old, then he won't be able to go as fast. So it has to be safe for the 2 of you. And that's so relevant to keep it pragmatic. And if it's pragmatic, if it's handleable, then you'll do it regularly. And that's more relevant than, of course, the studies are nice, and we show so much going on behind the scenes with inflammatory pathways going down. But I mean, that's what my clients always say. I mean, it doesn't matter because I want to walk faster, Dr. Banzi. I want to work longer. And at the end, I don't care about your stories, what you're telling me in your studies. So that's what I get from my clients. And that's what I want to give kind of the Irish clients, that it's really relevant to be pragmatic. And then it's easier to implement it in the daily routine.
And Professor, speaking of pragmatism, when it comes to these diets, obviously, as I'd mentioned, they can be a bit flexible, whether you move your days around and that kind of carry on. But I'd like you to help us kind of, and I was joking earlier about looking into the future because it's tomorrow there, but your research is was kind of groundbreaking, because there, as you'd said, the gold standard, the randomized double-blind studies on diet, you don't see a lot of them because no one's making huge profit off the answers there. So in your realm of the neuro receptors, the neural responses to what's happening in the gut, what's next out there? What research is happening now that you're doing or that you're hearing about, et cetera, that we can look forward to hearing and hopefully can be translated then into something positive for us?
So I think we are going to see a lot in the near future, because, as you said, I mean, definitely diet studies are difficult to do. I mean, good quality diet studies, but we have, I mean, we have more and more interest around it, as you can see from the National MS Society. So more funding available. Patients are very interested as you know, and also the clinicians are very interested to have more evidence-based science. And the research on diet is really linked also to, as I said, here is really linked also to the effects on the gut microbiome. So what really, is relevant, for instance, in terms of what, if you're specifically interested on way to modulate the gut microbiome and then interfere with, the disease, there are studies ongoing, for instance, to look at the effects of probiotics, which is one potential way to impact our gut microbiome and MS. So many patients, they, take over-the-counter probiotics, but there are not really strong scientific evidence that this can be helpful. So there are studies that are now ongoing to look at this potential. And then there are also other type of intervention that can interfere with the gut microbiome, which is like, which are called like fecal microbiota transplantation, but these are still very preliminary. So yeah, it's still, very in the infancy of research, this type of intervention. But the general sense is that diet is becoming a very important topic in the scientific world, as for the patients, which has been for a long time, but also for scientists. And we hope that funding, all is related to funding, because these studies are very expensive, and we hope that funding will increase to support these type of studies.
And when you're speaking of these studies, and like I said, that no one's making a fortune out of these, so they are difficult. So this is one of the places that funds that are raised by the MS societies around the world and MS International Foundation, et cetera, that can go to this type of research. So if people are looking at wanting more when it comes to research on this thing, these types of interventions, I suppose that's a good reason to get out there and help raise some funds. And Dr. Bansi, you and I were kind of talking about this a couple of days ago when we were setting this up. At this point, we're hearing a lot about the Epstein-Barr virus and its correlation, possibly maybe causative with multiple sclerosis, and I think all of us have learned through the COVID-19 experience that we had, even though we'd rather not talk about it anymore, that vaccines are can be a pretty divisive subject, and we really have to wonder, could a vaccine for the Epstein-Barr virus even get across the line? Because we're talking about having to inject children with this so that it's before they're exposed to the virus, etc. And when I'm listening to yourself, Professor, talking about little changes that we can make that appear to have real benefit for our brain health and possibly mitigating some of the symptoms of MS, or maybe even changing the disease itself. And Dr. Bansi, with what you're talking about in this high interval exercise and the chemicals that are released in our body and how that might actually help in rebuilding the brain and keeping our brains healthy, etc. It seems to me on so many levels that change in our dietary and our exercise plans is a lot easier than going for a jab. This is something, this is a lifestyle thing. So I think what we're talking about is what Thomas Jefferson, the one of the founding fathers of America, used to say is, does it pick my pocket and does it break my arm? And if it doesn't do that, then what is it to me? So we're talking about healthy changes to the diet, healthy changes to our exercise routine, which quite possibly could change the course of our MS and our lives. And I thank you all for being with us. As I expected, the time went really quickly. And I want to thank Dr. Bensi and Professor Apiccio and Dee Laffin, my old friend. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to have to wrap it up there. Next month on the Unspeakable Bits, we're going to talk about money. So join us next month. We'll put out the word on all of our platforms. So from myself and from all of our listeners and all of our viewers, Dee, Professor and Doctor, thank you all very much. And I thank all of you for listening, and we'll see you next month. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.